Morning guys, this is video 3 on the EOC review. This one's going to cover the rest of the Industrial Revolution, which is how do we fix the problems of the Gilded Age. Remember, it's called Gilded because there was lots of growth. There were a lot of problems though. So especially for immigrants and women fighting for suffrage, African Americans aren't going to be helped at all in the progressive era, but they still are going to have their needs addressed. Okay, so one of the ways that we're going to get change is through what we call muckrakers. These are journalists who help expose the truth about factories, about living conditions, about corrupt politicians, about big business, about what's going on with African Americans. And so we have a group of people that are really famous for writing about problems. And we have the writer, we have what they did, and then we have the results. For example, Upton Sinclair wrote about nasty meat conditions in factories. He wrote The Jungle. And what happened is Teddy Roosevelt read about it, and he basically got the Meat Inspection Act passed. Later on in Woodrow Wilson's presidency, he's going to pass a reformative law called the Pure Food and Drug Act, which requires all foods and drugs to have proper labels that explain what's in them. Jacob Riis, he wrote about living conditions for immigrants, these tenements that were just disgusting and horrible to live in. And so it established some things like building codes where they had to have certain building structures in a building. You couldn't have so many people living in one room. You had to have fire escapes, all those different things. Lincoln Steffens, he wrote about corrupt politicians, which is going to lead to political reforms and better conditions for immigrants. It's going to help get rid of political machines. A guy named Thomas Nast did a lot of cartoons that William Boss Tweed hated because it made him look like he was a criminal, because he was a criminal. So the public didn't know, especially immigrants. So Ida Tarbell, she wrote about the evils of monopolies, and specifically Standard Oil and how it bought out other companies in order to destroy all competition. And basically Standard Oil was a huge monopoly with huge power. So what she wrote about led to antitrust laws, anti-monopoly laws. Ida Wells, she wrote about the evils of lynchings. Unfortunately, this is the only group of Americans who really wasn't helped in the progressive era. But again, these are called muckrakers. They did a lot to change problems in America during the Industrial Revolution. Okay. So here are some other progressive reforms in people. We've got we got big business, monopolies, child labor, living conditions, nasty meat, corrupt leaders. What do we do about that? Well, muckrakers write about it, and the good leaders like Teddy Roosevelt, they're the ones that actually fix it. Again, an example, Meat Inspection Act, going to make our meat more safe to eat. Sherwin Antitrust Act is going to start to break apart monopolies. Okay, here's another example. Farmers didn't have any power in the government. Individual voters didn't have a voice in the government. So those are populist party concerns. And what's the solution? We're going to get some senators and some politicians to eventually pass some things to help those people out. The Populist Party got the 17th Amendment passed, which is the direct election of senators. A guy named Senator Robert LaFollette worked to get voters more power. He came up with things like the initiative, where voters can propose laws, the referendum, where you can vote on laws, and the recall, where if you think a politician is bad, you can vote to remove them. Before Robert LaFollette and these progressive people, there were no options for people to suggest laws. There were no options to get rid of bad politicians. And now we can. Remember, that's why it's called the progressive era. We're going to make changes that improve society for all citizens. One of the more commonly well-known problems, women couldn't vote. They couldn't vote. They didn't have the same civil rights as men. So the solution is women like Susan B. Anthony, Ida Wells, Lucretia Mott, they're going to work for women's suffrage. They're not even going to write a lot. What they're going to do is they're going to be out there. They're going to be marching. They're going to go on hunger strikes. In one case, one woman, Carrie Chatt, she was working for women's suffrage and prohibition. She went into bars and started breaking up bottles of liquor. So that got the world's attention. And so, because of the efforts of these people, the 19th Amendment was ratified, allowing women to vote. And because of Carrie Chatt, I think that's her name, the 18th Amendment banning alcohol was passed. Okay, so here's some more muckraking folks. This goes all the way back to Lincoln Steffens about corruption, not really corruption, but horrible conditions that immigrants faced. The jungle, of course, about horrible meatpacking industry. Then we got all the way up to 2000. We have what they call bloggers. People who maybe not in the newspaper, but they write about horrible conditions online. What we're seeing now is whenever there's a case of police brutality or someone's killed, specifically in the case of African Americans, those people who take the video and they actually expose the truth about what these corrupt police officers did, those could be considered muckrakers. So muckrakers haven't gone away. We just use different tools to expose corruption. So let's talk about Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, he was one of the most BA presidents ever. One of his more famous quotes is, "I don't always get shot during the middle of a speech, but when I do, I finish the damn speech." He did get shot in the middle of a speech, and they said, "Mr. President, we need to go take you to the hospital." He said, "Hang on a second, I need to finish my speech," and he did. And then he went to the hospital. So he was the most progressive president we've had. He was aggressive when it came to getting what he wanted done, whether it was overseas, whether it was here at home, whether it had to do with protecting our country or making it better for our citizens. He got what he wanted. And a lot of people say he used what he called the bully pulpit, where was he a bully? Did he abuse his power? I don't know, but he got a lot of things done. So he was a trust buster. He fought against monopolies. He did what we call the Roosevelt corollary or the big stick policy. He basically threatened other nations and said, do not come over to our side of the world. Do not mess with any of our interest in the New World, which are Latin American countries, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Panama. He fought in the Spanish-American War. His Rough Riders did a lot of awesome things over there. He supported imperialism. He wanted to take over other countries. He fought for change. He formed what we call the Bull Moose Party, which is the Progressive Party. He wasn't even nominated his own party. So he said, you know what? I'm just going to form my own party and run for president. Now, that would have worked, but unfortunately they split the vote and Woodrow Wilson won. He was really the one who fought to protect American interest in China. We call that the open door policy. And then finally, I already mentioned this, the Panama Canal. The French started to build the Panama Canal to link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and they went bankrupt. And so Teddy Roosevelt came in and said, look, I want to finish. So he struck a deal. He said to the Panamanians who wanted independence from a country called Colombia, they couldn't get it because they were too weak. He said, look, if you let us build a canal through your territory, we'll take care of your independence for you. We'll make sure you're independent. And he did. So he was pretty aggressive, but again, extremely successful. I look up to him, a lot of people do, because he got things done. Okay, so a couple things here. Question 1 says, which of the following groups had their lives improved the most during America's progressive era? Black men, women, children, workers. If I had to answer this question, I would probably say B, women. Women's suffrage. That's probably the biggest thing that women were fighting for. Many women were also fighting to end alcohol, which did happen. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. Number 2, minimum age and compulsory schooling were 2 ways that states eventually eliminated what? Just think about, remember your key words. Minimum age, compulsory schooling. Compulsory means you have to go to school. What's that going to solve? Well, that's going to solve child labor, because you can't be working in a factory if you have to go to school. Okay. Number 3, a main purpose of Theodore Roosevelt's trust-busting policies was to, don't even look at the answer choices, look at the key words. The biggest key word is trust-busting. Remember what a trust is. So it's A, reduce corruption in government. B, save the nation's banks. C, encourage competition in business. D, end strikes by labor unions. So remember, trust is another word for monopoly. Monopoly is when there is no competition. So a trust-busting policy is one that breaks up monopoly. So the answer is C, encourage competition in business. Number 4, since 1913, the United States banking system, interest rates, and the amount of money in circulation have largely been controlled by A, the U.S. Supreme Court, B, the Federal Reserve System, C, the FDIC, or D, the President's Council of Economic Advisors. If you have a wallet or a purse, get out a dollar bill and look at the top. The organization that controls how much money is in circulation is at the top. It's called the Federal Reserve, or the Fed. Okay. Number 5, during which period in U.S. history were amendments concerning the income tax, direct election of senators, prohibition, and women's suffrage enacted? Okay. All that stuff happened in one time period. And all of it happened, all of them were pretty much good things except for prohibition. All those changes were in the progressive era. So think of an era where there's a lot of good change, and it's going to be the progressive era, progress. Okay, fact crap. Muckrakers were journalists who wrote about corruption in business, politics, society, in hopes that exposing the truth would lead to change. That is a fact. Okay, totally true. B. Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, which exposed corruption in political machines in major U.S. cities. That is crap, because he did write The Jungle, but it wasn't about political machines. It was about horrible conditions in meatpacking industries. Okay. C. Teddy Roosevelt helped pass the Meat Inspection Act as a result of reading, as a direct result of the book he read about Chicago meatpacking plants. Totally fact. We just talked about that. Letter D, excuse me. The 16th, 17th Amendments, senators elected, and federal income tax were passed during the progressive movement because of the political movement started by American farmers. Totally fact. That group, remember, was called the Populist. E. Susan B. Anthony fought for women's suffrage, which is protection from domestic violence in the home. That is crap. People always see that word suffrage and they think suffer. No. Suffrage always means the right to vote, and women got that in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. Letter F. Muckrakers helped expose corruption in business, including low pay for workers, child labor, dangerous working conditions, which helped pass laws to protect workers and labor unions. That is a fact. Okay. G. Muckrakers did not help end monopolies during the Gilded Age as monopolies exist today. That is crap, because monopolies are totally illegal even today. And a lot of that has to do with two laws, the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act, both of which were passed with a lot of effort from these people who wrote about corruption, like Ida Tarbell. Imperialism. We're going to take a break here. We're going to come back. We'll talk about imperialism and World War I, so please come back. That was about 12 minutes. Deuces.